Cruz Show, Real 92.3 LA's new home for hip-hop. The legendary Jim Lampley is here. Sir, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Legendary is a word that's thrown around, especially a lot in hip-hop, right? I mean, you could be relatively a new artist and people call you legendary, but you embody the term legendary. That's safe to say?
Well, I genuinely appreciate the compliment. I can't imagine that legendary is thrown around any more prolifically in hip-hop than in sports.
Yeah.
I fight a continuing war. For a while, I've stopped doing it with my students at the University of North Carolina. I teach a course in the communications department at the University of North Carolina, my alma mater, and several of my students want to be network television sportscasters.
Yeah.
And the first thing I say to them when I get hold of that ambition, understand they want to do that, I say, okay, I want to ban 2 words from your vocabulary. I want you never, ever to say incredible, and I want you never, ever to say unique. Well, why is that? Well, okay, let's go through the meaning of those 2 words. Unique, one on the planet, only one, nothing else exactly like it. Incredible, can't be believed. Simply can't get my head around it enough to actually believe it. How many times a day do you use those 2 words and not use them with application to the actual meaning that you would read in a dictionary?
Yeah.
I'm fighting back. I'm going to fight a one-man battle against that. So, legendary, good enough.
You're also incredible and unique, though, Jim.
There's that too, yeah.
Not
There's
gonna
only
fight.
one of you.
Not gonna fight today. I'm here to be cooperative.
My man, that's right.
Yeah.
Jim Lampley is here, man. Cruz Show. This is amazing. There's a lot going on. There's so much to cover. Over 30 years in the game, right? Calling fights. My dad was or is a huge boxing fan, right? He says there's no bigger compliment than calling a fighter a Mexican fighter, or you fight like a Mexican fighter, right? That's my dad. But my dad would always be, whether if he was confused or not during the fight, he would be like, okay, ahí viene Jim Lampley, a ver qué dice. Now that means here's Jim Lampley. Let's hear what he's got to say, and this is the truth. For him, you were the truth. You were the end all. You were the bottom line, and he didn't understand English or spoke English. So I think he understood your passion for it, and your body language, and your tone, most importantly.
I think that's probably true. And the backstory, which is unaccountable and not believable in certain ways, but it's the way it is. The backstory is that my father died when I was 5 years old. The very first sports event my mother, sat me down to watch at a television set in 1955, 1 year after my father died of cancer. I was 6 years old. My mother sat me down in front of a small television set at a friend's house and said, sit here. You're going to watch Friday night fights on Gillette. The fight is Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson for the middleweight championship of the world. Wow. It's their second fight. And by the way, for the next hour and a half, a man named Don Dunphy is going to teach you everything you need to know about boxing. That was the first live sports event I ever watched on television. Mm-hmm. Fast forward from there, 32 years to 1987, when I've been on the staff at ABC Sports for 13 years, and an incoming new chief executive who wants to upend the organization and change the way things have been done, wants to get rid of me, and more important, wants to get rid of my contract, which is way more expensive than he would ever have dreamed it was for me. And he chooses as the vehicle for getting rid of me that he will assign me to boxing, that I'll be seen by the audience as Cosell's successor at ringside, that they'll never, ever accept it. And if he forces me to become the boxing host, I'll be gone within 6 months. So I didn't say a word to him, okay?
He thought it would be torture for you.
He thought it would be torture. He thought it would be a terrible fit. He thought the audience could never possibly bond with me as a purveyor of that particular sport. And, by the way, he didn't pay enough attention to the fact that his network, ABC, had just signed an entry-level look-see contract with a rising American heavyweight whose name was Mike Tyson. So my first boxing match on television is to go up to Glens Falls, New York, to cover the 19-year-old Mike Tyson in a fight against Jesse Ferguson. And I have enough wherewithal and ammunition and friends in New York to talk to and get a rundown on Tyson and be literate enough to know what I'm talking about on the air. And that was the day that Tyson blew up Ferguson's nose with an uppercut in the 4th round. Literally exploded his nose.
Blood
there was
everywhere.
blood all over the ring.
Place.
Yeah, it was a sudden, colorful explosion of blood. And after the fight, when it was stopped in the 4th or 5th round, my expert commentator, who was an executive at the network, another person that Dennis Swanson thought he could get rid of with this particular ploy, Alex goes into the ring to talk to Mike and asks him about the uppercut. And Mike said, well, Katamata taught me that the purpose of the uppercut is to drive the opponent's nose bone into his brain. I was trying to drive his nose bone into his brain. And at that moment, I said to myself, oh, my God, we have a multiple fight contract with this kid. Wow. Look at what I have just inherited as my new venture on this network.
A murderer.
Look at what he thought he was going to use to get rid of me. Yeah. This kid is not only going to be the #1 quote machine in boxing, he's going to be the #1 quote machine in sports. And in the next 2 weeks, they all came rolling out. Boxing is a hurt business. Everybody's got a plan until you hit them, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And I was launched. So I owe my continuing, thank you, validity and cachet as a boxing commentator largely to Mike Tyson, who was the first vehicle about which I spoke on the air. And also to my mother, who sat me down and said, you got to watch Sugar Ray Robinson. He boxes like a dancer.
I think that's such a good lesson, too, to people, because a lot of times people get intimidated or don't deal with change well in this industry, and I'm sure a lot of your students, you preach this to them as well. But that was kind of sort of what was meant to be for you. I know change is difficult, but what a path it sent you on.
Oh,
and we can't be afraid of that.
It was written in the stars from the moment my mother said, what am I going to do with him this afternoon? I'll take him to the cocktail party. I'll put him in a room by himself. I'll turn on the Friday night fights. He can entertain himself, and he can learn to observe what his father loved to watch while he was alive. That was the beginning. And that's the life that I'm still living now. What are we talking? 70 years later, 1955.
Amazing. Can you explain to everybody how ppview.com works, pay-per-view.com works, and what you'll be doing there on Saturday with the Crawford fight?
One of the things I teach in my course at UNC, and the course is called Evolution of Storytelling in American Electronic News Media. And one of the things I teach to them as an ongoing topic of conversation in the course is how evolutions in electronics, in business practices, in personnel, in audience composition, et cetera, all of those things will ultimately lead to changes in the way stories are told. So ppv.com is a perfect example of that. Because we now have text, because we have digital forms of communication, because somebody who is affiliated with a media organization can communicate with a broad audience without even having to use his voice, simply by typing digitally into a text stream, then we have ppv.com. I, along with LA boxing writer Lance Pugmire, welterweight fighter Chris Algieri, Dan Canobio, who is the youngest son of the family that created CompuBox, the four of us sit and watch the fight, and we type our digital observations into a text chain, and the audience can participate with us. They can push back. Jim Lampley, you're completely full of crap. That is not what's happening here. Jim Lampley, you are amazing. You are the most prescient observer of the sport.
You're incredible.
Ever.
You're unique.
Can be either, at any given moment. So that's what ppv.com is. When somebody buys the telecast to be a part of the chat stream at ppv.com. And, of course, what we're most looking for from those people is that somewhere in the first round they say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm on a chat with Jim Lampley and da-da-da-da-da. They cover me
That'll
with glory.
happen. Yeah.
They talk about it, and it does happen. And, and we try to quiet that down. Yeah, okay, we understand, but what this really, and by the way, Chris Algieri too, and we go on and talk about the fight. So it's a new form of communication, a new bond between the audience and the editorial people who are discussing the event, and ppv.com is the pioneering step. I'm sure it's going to be around for, 20, 30 years until the next level of evolution takes place, and I can somehow be projected into somebody's living room and talk to them personally.
The hologram,
face-to-face.
the Jim Lampley hologram.
There are 1.5 million Jim Lampleys today sitting there. That'll happen too, somehow or another.
Somehow, some way, absolutely. When we're all long gone, right, I don't think we'll be able to rest with AI. We'll still be alive in some shape or form.
I totally agree. Yeah, there are people who are going to be around. I mean, if somebody wanted to do a version of Cosell right now for an audience that didn't have the thrill of seeing that particular self-parody, then we could certainly, through AI reproduce Cosell.
Absolutely. I mean, there were, Tupac was at Coachella, right? So, and anything is possible.
Anything.
That night that Tupac was murdered in Las Vegas, you were at that fight, at that
No, I was
fight.
not at that
You were not
fight.
there.
That was a Showtime fight.
Oh,
okay.
shoot.
That was a Showtime fight. Mike had made his migration years before, leaving HBO to go to Showtime. So that was the Showtime crew, the Showtime group. I remember first getting word of it and turning on TV news to learn what had happened on the Strip. I had seen the fight, of course, on Showtime, but I was not around the night of that.
Can you watch a fight and just relax and just enjoy the fight, or are you picking it apart?
So
no matter where you are.
Probably the closest I've come to just enjoying a fight recently, and it's very appropriate for us to talk about it today, was Terrence Crawford against Errol Spence a year ago. I very purposely avoided talking to people before the fight because I didn't want to stake myself out in a particular way and define what I expected.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I didn't, because, of course, everything that happened that night was exactly what I expected and would have told people, that was going to happen. Only some of my closest friends know. Do you have any memory, either of you? This goes a little far back. Do you remember a great college and professional basketball player from Carolina named Phil Ford?
Phil Ford.
Phil Ford was a two-time National Player of the Year point guard.
Yeah.
All-America in 74 and 75. Rookie of the Year with the Kansas City Kings. Now lives in Raleigh. Major League boxing fan. And I went to watch Spence and Crawford with Phil Ford. And before the fight, he said, I'm so excited that you're here because this is a pick'em fight. And I said, it's not a pick'em fight. He said, what do you mean it's not a pick'em fight? Everybody says this is a pick'em fight. I said, yeah, I know that everybody says that, but I had the privilege of covering Crawford's genesis on HBO.
Yeah.
I've been in rooms with Crawford. I've spoken privately with Crawford, and all I'll say to you is it's not a pick'em fight. And he says, well, you don't know Spence that well. I said, you're right. I do not know Spence that well, but I know enough about Crawford to know that he is a self-defining fighter. And there aren't that many of them. But the guys who have all the craft, Roy Jones is another example of that, who know everything, know that they know everything, and mostly know enough to respect what the other guy can do and to adapt in advance and make sure that they're not going to play into what the other guy can do. They don't allow themselves overconfidence. Crawford's that kind of guy. That professionalism is totally built in for him. So I told Phil, bragging now, I said, it's not a pick'em fight, and I'm not at all surprised if Crawford, at least for the moment, functionally ends Spence's career. Because with what I think Terrence is going to do to Errol Spence, it's very hard for a fighter like Spence, who's been treated to all the praise and the positive reinforcement that he's gotten, go back into the ring and feel the same way. It isn't going to happen. And look what's happened.
Exactly that.
We have not seen that fully realized Errol Spence comeback yet that says, okay, I'm over that. I put it behind me. He faced a kind of ego diminution against Crawford. It's very, very hard for a lot of prize fighters to deal with. I don't know if Crawford will ever have to deal with that. It would be hard for him too.
Yeah, absolutely.
If he finds somebody who has unraveled his Rubik's Cube, then that's going to be hard for him because his level of confidence is now extreme, given everything he's been able to prove in the ring.
He is the guy. And I think Saturday is going to be a really good fight again.
Really good.
PPV.com. We got Crawford versus Madrimov. And I love what PPV.com does because it's going to appeal to a younger audience because my kids are used to the chat in Twitch. My kids are used to the chat in
all about
Discord
the chat, man.
or whatever. It's all about the chat. And that interactivity with someone like you and all those experts that you mentioned.
And everybody gets to strut a little bit.
Yeah.
You know? If they push back and say, Jim, I don't agree with you, I think that's wrong, and the next round supports what they said, then you know that now they're puffing their chest up.
I put Jim Lampley in his place.
Right. And that's good. That's really good for us when it happens at ppv.com.
Sure. That's what the audience wants is interaction with the people that they admire and look up to. I think that we've seen that with social media, and now we see it in these different iterations.
And they want to feel respected.
Of course. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So when Terrence wins on Saturday, that's
the way I see it.
That's right.
So is Canelo within the realm of possibility?
Well, that's what it's all about.
Right.
I mean, he is campaigning for the level of credibility he needs for Canelo to see him as a logical and worthy opponent and not just fighting somebody smaller. And so this is his audition to go in against a kind of a tin type of Canelo. And Eastern European type Canelo, and demonstrate that he's all that. He's Terrence Crawford against everybody, not just against the people whom he's fought up to this point. And I give him a ton of credit for choosing Madrimov because, of course, 90% of the American boxing public doesn't have a clue who Madrimov is. Crawford knows who Madrimov is. Crawford knows what this challenge is. Crawford knows what it is he'll have to prove to get past a guy like this on Saturday. He doesn't worry about anybody who doesn't know the game enough to respect that. He's worried about that 5 or 10% of the audience who really understand what's going on and who will walk away from this fight saying, yeah, I want to see him against Canelo. I mean, if he can deal with this guy, let's see what he can do against the number one guy in that particular area of the sport.
Yeah.
Now, you've seen, there's been many moments, right? I'm well aware of Gatti-Ward, round 9. I'm very aware of that and what that really means to you, right? And how that connects with you. But there's been so many moments that you've been witness to. What's the goriest scene you've seen?
The goriest? Well, I've seen some fights that devolved into overwhelming bloodletting where the audience would look at all the blood and say, oh, my God, how can they go on? But fighters understand that certain cuts are superficial and that the blood is going to flow. If you get cut on the top of your head, I feel terrible for Tim Tszyu that he wound up losing a title because of a freakish incident that produced a cut on the one spot on the body where no cut man could ever stop the blood from flowing. I had the unique and useful education when I was 3 or 4 years old of having my brother drop me on my head on a rock gravel driveway in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and I got cut in exactly the same place where Tim Tszyu's cut took place.
Wow.
And I can remember my uncle, the doctor, saying to my mother, my mother saying, stitch it up. We've got to stop the bleeding. My uncle saying, it doesn't matter whether I stitch it up. They're not going to be able to stop that bleeding because the single place in the body where the largest convergence of blood vessels takes place is the top of the skull. Why? The brain needs blood. So there are so many veins verging with each other. It's such a multiple highway in there. Nothing I do is going to stop this bleeding. Yeah. We're just going to have to sit here and apply pressure and deal until the body decides that it has bled enough. That's what happened to Tim Tszyu. Tim Tszyu wasn't in desperate trouble because of the flow of blood, but it looked gruesome to the audience. It looked inexplicable to the audience. And after a while, you had to stop the fight because it's not healthy for a guy to bleed that much. It wasn't because he was too badly hurt to keep fighting per se. It was just because he got hit in exactly the wrong place. And oh, by the way, by an elbow.
Oh,
and now a really nice guy, Sebastian Fundora, gets to call himself a champion because he happened to land a foul on the one place where no cut man in the world could possibly have stopped the bleeding.
There's blood everywhere. It just doesn't stop.
Right.
Yeah. Oof.
Yeah, and that was literally a bloodbath.
Everyone's slipping around on it.
All over the place. Yeah.
All over the place. What's up, Garcia?
Don't forget
that one's in my mind, although I've seen, many of those over the years. And, in terms of guys hurting each other and continually hurting each other, Gatti-Ward is a pretty doggone good example.
Yeah.
That's will and courage beyond the logical definition of will and courage. And
that was
and I'll never
stuff.
forget the story I love to tell about Gatti-Ward 1. Fight's over. Crowd in the Mohegan Sun Casino has filtered out. Emmanuel and I are still standing there talking about it because it was such an amazing thing to watch. Eventually, Emmanuel goes off with one of his buddies somewhere. I'm gathering up my stuff, and I leave the arena and walk out into the hallway, and I run into Gatti's manager, Pat Lynch, and Pat is crying. And I said, Pat, why are you so upset? Why are you weeping? He said, I just can't believe we lost. And I said, Pat, if we took all 11, 12,000 people who were in this arena tonight, tracked them for a year, went out a year from now at some random moment and found them, asked them all who was the winner of the decision, how many of them do you think that would get it right? Don't you think that a majority of the people would forget that this decision actually went against your fighter, that their hearts would tell them that he was the winner, et cetera, et cetera? He said, yeah, but we have to live with it. I said, Pat, this is not a loss. Nobody's going to remember anything other than the courage, the commitment, the will, the spirit that these two fighters demonstrated against each other. And 90% of them, if you ask them who won the fight, they're not going to remember. So
it became bigger than a win.
I'm happy to say it proved to be true over a long period of time.
100%.
A lot of people to this day will say, Arturo won. Yeah. Well, in the eyes of most, he was the winner. So
yeah, but it just became a lesson in boxing that has to be learned and has to be watched and studied.
Right.
And it was beyond a win at that point. That was just something that I don't know if we'll ever see again.
Right. That's not a win-lose type fight. Yeah. That's a two heroes fight. And I've seen a lot of two heroes fights. I mean, Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield. The first fight. Tell me who won.
We did as the fans.
That's right.
That's
right.
We did as fans.
We do.
100% correct.
Was there ever a fight that you were calling and watching and thought to yourself, okay, somebody's cheating here. This doesn't look right?
You mean a fight that was a giveaway, a fixed fight,
possibly,
like that?
or somebody was on something that made them a little.
I probably had that feeling a few times. As a commentator, I disciplined myself against leaning too hard into that because I never wanted to disrespect somebody in a way in which they did not want to be disrespected or deserve to be disrespected. And there's no greater disrespect that you can offer to any fighter than to say, you threw that one. You tossed that into the can. You didn't give the fans what they came to see. It's pretty hard to. I admire these people so much. I care about them so much over time. The guy who assigned me to call boxing was trying to get rid of me. He had no idea how directly he connected to my heart. Yeah. So I love fighters. They've been my life. They've been my subject matter, my progression. I've lived in nice houses and eaten great food, and my children have gone to great schools, all because of fighters. I respect them too much to accuse any of them of doing something dishonorable without absolute concrete proof.
Yeah. And that happens at the end of the fight. We find out, so-and-so was on this or that, or this was being taken.
Performance enhancement is a plague, and we have to push back against it in every way that we can.
Absolutely. What's up, Garcia?
Once again, Saturday, ppv.com. Jim Lampley will be in the chat along with a bunch of other great experts. I'm going to watch it
Legendary.
that way if I don't make it out there. My goal is to try to get out there because BMO Stadium is an amazing stadium. I love open air boxing. Like, it's so fun to be able to watch it
I think this will be a great fight to be at.
Eminem is performing.
Eminem is
too,
performing,
which is crazy.
man.
It's got a great lineup
I
card.
think it's taken the audience a long, long time to understand exactly why Crawford deserves maximum appreciation.
Yeah, I would
But,
agree.
he's a throwback. He is the example in his generation of what committed fighting is all about, and he's a pro.
And now he's in a Kendrick Lamar song too. So, I mean, people love him even more with that, which is amazing for this genre right here in hip hop. So I talked about outdoor venues. Jim, you've seen boxing matches in all kinds of different places. Is there a favorite place to call a boxing match for you, stadium-wise?
Well, I called boxing matches in Madison Square Garden. I called boxing matches in Yankee Stadium. Max Kellerman would tell you the same thing. The greatest crowd ever, the greatest audience feeling ever, the greatest event ever was Vladimir Klitschko versus Anthony Joshua in Wembley Stadium with 99,000 people. The British invented boxing. So that was truly an incomparable day. And, oh, by the way, to put the icing on the cake, just before the bell sounded for round one of Klitschko-Joshua, I turned around to get one last look at the arena and noticed suddenly that seated directly behind me, one row behind me, looking over my shoulder, were Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson.
Oh, that's so cool.
What a sight.
Yeah.
That's so
And
cool.
I smiled at both of them. They smiled back at me.
Yeah.
Fist bump and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, I got a better seat than they do.
You don't want to tell them that,
And
though.
they're
Pretty
champions.
amazing. Well, they can see it.
They
I
can
didn't
see
have to
it.
tell them.
Right there.
They're looking over my shoulder.
Hey, you just mentioned Mike Tyson again. Do you have an interesting story with Don King?
I have a lot of interesting stories with Don King, and a lot of them have to do with long, raucous dinners at which he overglorified every single person at the table. At some point, Don was going to deliver a narrative about you and what you've done, et cetera, et cetera. And his narrative about me, because I had been functionally Cosell's successor at ABC. So Don's narrative about me was very often all the things that I did better than Cosell and all the reasons why Cosell couldn't shine my shoes and stuff like that. And I'm sitting there the whole time thinking, he wouldn't do this if Howard were here.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's so true.
This is all for the non-Howard audience.
Right, exactly. And he said the same thing about Howard at a dinner where you weren't at either.
100%.
100%. Absolutely. He was a great salesman, right?
Yeah,
That's what he
that's
was,
right.
man.
Yeah.
That's right.
Also very legendary.
Yeah.
Who's the best boxer of all time, according to you?
The best boxer of
if you had
all
to
time.
single one out.
Well, okay, I have to be true to my roots. The very first person my mother showed me in the ring was Sugar Ray Robinson. Now, I became, as the result partially of that experience, I became the world's biggest Cassius Clay fan, which eventually meant the world's biggest Muhammad Ali fan. But boxing was different back in the 40s and 50s. And the culture in which Ray Robinson fought was, there were no setups, there were no fights that he walked into knowing, I'm here to win because this other guy doesn't have anything that can match. You might have felt that way several times, but there were a lot of great opponents on that list. There were a lot of truly great fights. I'm going to have to say that based on everything I saw, the greatest fighter I saw was Sugar Ray Robinson.
Mm-hmm. Just swift magic out there, right?
Well, all the natural kinetic movement,
Sure.
the ability to slug as well as box, to dance as well as pitch, etc. All those things.
Boxing IQ off the charts.
He had it all, and a mean streak.
What it takes.
I spoke to some trainers who worked in the gym with Ray Robinson and who told me about, what would happen if you got on the wrong side or on the bad side, and how he could strip you naked in front of the other people in the gym. And, and he was merciless about it because there was no mercy in that period of time, that boxing. Remember, the great scene from Raging Bull when he's standing in the late rounds in front of the very bloodied figure of his number one rival, and he's screaming, Ray, you never knock me down. You never beat him 5 times in 6 fights.
Yeah,
but you never knocked me down. That was what was important.
He was hanging on to that. Yeah,
exactly.
You've had many conversations with Ryan Garcia. What do you make of what he's going through now?
I haven't had a lot of conversations with Ryan Garcia. I've had only 1 or 2 conversations with Ryan Garcia. Mm-hmm. I hope that he will get his head straight and stop allowing the spoiled child in his persona to overwhelm the legitimate worker bee who understood what he had to do to get to the level of skill and confidence that he reached in the sport. I hope he will choose at some point to say, this is science and a positive test is a positive test. Okay, I don't know how it happened, but the bottom line is I was contaminated. And if he can do that, then I think he'll win some of his audience back. But I think he's lost some of his audience for right now. And that's too bad because he's a plausible attraction in the sport.
Absolutely. Last question here, because I know you got to run. But how much Spanish have you learned across the years just by being next to Mexican in Espanol? How much Espanol have you learned over the course of your boxing career?
Más de poquito. Vive para 8 o 9 años in Miami when I was preteen and teenager.
Okay.
And I dated some Cuban girls.
Okay.
Okay. And Spanish is the language of romance.
Yes.
It is unquestionably the number one language for describing emotional attraction to someone. Years after I dated Cuban girls in Miami, I dated a Venezuelan girl in New York. She taught me some cultural differences that changed my language and my approach.
Yeah.
And I had a tremendous, wonderful 8th and 9th grade Spanish teacher in Miami whose name was Miss Summer. And I'm not sure where Miss Summer developed her devotion to proper pronunciation, but she was a fanatic. Okay, and she taught me for 4 semesters, 2 years in junior high and high school, and she would not accept anything other than totally perfect pronunciation. So when I got into boxing, that became, particularly in the room with the fighter meetings the day before the fights, that became a weapon for me. It became a part of my arsenal. And I had a particularly positive relationship over the years with Oscar. And why did I have a great relationship with Oscar? Because Miss Summer had taught me it is not de la Hoya, it is de la Hoya. Okay? You allow the H to just gently glide off of the tongue, and you do not push in the back of your mouth for the hard H. And Oscar was the person who used to come to me after fighter meetings and say, I love to hear you say my name.
That's so
because
great.
I never said de la Hoya. I said de la Hoya. Thank you, Miss Summer.
Ah, that's
Miss
amazing.
Summer.
That's such a great story, man. That's such a great story. Thank you,
God
Jim.
for Miss Summer. Thank you, Jim. We
My
appreciate
privilege.
it.
Everything. Don't forget, Saturday, Jim Lampley on ppv.com, live streaming. Jump in the chat. Make sure you be nice in the chat.
Yeah, that's a good point, Garcia.
Bueno
Listen.
escribir en español.
Oh, yeah.
Es
Bien.
imposible para ti, es bueno para mí.
Eso.
Eso, señor. Carnal.
And now, of course, that I bragged about that, somebody's going to embarrass me. I promise you. Round 1 embarrassment.
You better not.
Here, Jim. Here are 3 sentences in Spanish. Respond to this. Oh, well, I'm just skipping right by that one.
Te pasas, Jim.
I had to brag a little.
That's right. Nah, chat, be on your best behavior. This man is iconic, chat. So make sure you recognize his greatness. Jim Lampley, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
We appreciate
Great
the time
pleasure
and
to be
energy.
here.
Absolutely. You're welcome here anytime. I can't
I
imagine you'd ever
recognize
come
your
back,
greatness.
But thank you very much. We appreciate it. Jim Lampley, Cruz Show, Real 92.3.
Yo, check out more of our YouTube interviews now, ASAP+. Download the free iHeartRadio app so you can check out the Cruz Show podcast.